All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming to this Career Connection Success Series iteration for history. Learning with some alumni about great careers in history and about the great things you can do with a history degree. I'm going to go ahead and allow the panelists to introduce themselves, to just tell them a little bit about, when they graduated from OWU, what their degrees were in, and kind of what they've been up to since graduation. So we will go ahead and get started with Alexander.
Great. Well, so my name is Alex Lawson. I graduated from Ohio Wesleyan in 2015. My bachelor's was in history with a minor in political science. After OWU, I went to Temple where I got my master's in history. Graduated in 2017, and then since then I've been working at the Maryland Center for History and Culture. Initially working in education, and then kind of making my way into the more curatorial aspect of it. Between OWU and then, I've had a bunch of random internships, in college and graduate school. You can see some of them there. So Museum of the American Revolution, Harper's Ferry National Historic Park, and a small house museum in Philadelphia. Recently I've been working on exhibits, opening them up. So I kind of will be happy to explain about what it's that curatorial aspect for a museum. But that's kind of what I've been doing since graduating OWU. Primarily been at the Maryland Center for History and Culture.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here with us, Alex. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
We're going to go ahead over to Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. So I am a 2014 graduate of Ohio Wesleyan with a double major in history and psychology. I then went on to UC, so University of Cincinnati, with a major in history and a concentration in public history. And then from there, I started working at Historic Missouri Village and Fort Lawrence Museum in southeastern Ohio. And now I'm at the Massillon Museum, so I'm the Education Outreach Manager. Much like Alex, I had many internships between now and then. So I interned at Olmsted Historical Society in Olmsted Falls, Ohio, Western Reserve Historical Society in Cleveland, the Harriet Beecher Stowe House in Cincinnati, and the Cincinnati Museum Center. So my background is primarily education and public programs, and then curatorial work as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And then last but not least, Zachary.
Hi, I'm Zach Paul. I also graduated in 2015. My major was history education, and I minored in a few different things, but including sociology and zoology. I worked as a high school history social studies teacher for 3 years before I eventually went to graduate school at Teachers College at Columbia and got my Master's of Arts in education policy, specializing in data analysis and research methods because I wanted to make a transition into policy work. So I've been working for the last almost 2.5, but it's about two years as a staff writer and researcher for a policy initiative here in New York City, focused on sustainably funded teacher residencies.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So I just have a couple questions prepared just about the history degrees at Ohio Wesleyan, how it helped and kind of how it affected them in their current career trajectory. And then we'll have the last 20 or 30 minutes to ask questions. If you guys have any questions, we'll have more than enough time to go through those. So just thinking about your history degree and your time at Ohio Wesleyan, I'm just curious, what about history was attractive to you thinking about your time at Ohio Wesleyan and beyond? And we can, whoever feels ready to answer can go ahead, but I would at least, like to hear from everybody on at least one of these things. So please, whenever you feel ready, go ahead and get started.
I can start. So going into OWU, I was one of the folks who knew I already wanted to work at a museum. I've known I wanted to work in the museum field since like the 5th grade on a really awesome field trip. And so, I went to OWU because I had already met some of the history professors and had the awesome summer experience that OWU provides still, maybe, where kids get to, visit during their senior year and figure out what they might like to study there. And I really liked the professors and the different courses that were offered. So I went in, knowing that I could work with Dr. Spa, Dr. Arnold, Dr. Flam. Those were my primary professors I worked with. and have a really great experience that would prepare me for the future. And then I'd also have the opportunity to work. Yes, I didn't mention that I also volunteered at the Delaware County Historical Society, and that was another formative experience during my college years. So there were just a lot of opportunities to be very hands-on in the history field and in public history that I really appreciated at OU.
For me, kind of very similar. I had an idea that I wanted to go into the history field, going into college. I, when I went on a tour, I was constantly asking about the history department. Initially, I actually left the history department my freshman year to go into political science. Then I realized that I wasn't a huge fan of political science. So I returned back to the history field, history department. And for me, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do museums. It kind of wasn't a thing on my mind until I took an internship over the summer. But I was more kind of into the research and the academic aspect, and the ability to take seminar courses that included writing and independent research I found valuable and interesting to me, and I definitely use those skills today. So for me, it was the ability to kind of like figure out my own path in terms of what kind of history I enjoyed, and get the ability to research and write on my own. And then I kind of took that and figured out what I wanted to do with it.
For me, I had always known that I'd wanted to, at least up until that point, wanted to teach, which is one of the reasons why I went to Ohio Wesleyan. And I was very torn between what at a high school level I would like to teach. And I'd always loved history, always been interested in the social sciences. And the more and more history classes I took, the more it solidified the fact that I wanted to complete the history education major. And the more and more social science classes that I took, the more I wanted to be involved in those fields as well. So I think just in general, the skills that you learn in understanding history, analyzing history are just very universal. They're hyper connected to every other social science, every other natural science, every other field in general, and any other line of work that you might go into. It's just something that I've always valued, and I still value it to this day. I still use skills from it today.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. And that actually leads perfectly into my next question, thinking a little bit about your current roles and about how your history degree helped you prepare you, and different, of course, if you have any courses or professors or anything that was really influential, just talking about how that degree really helped prepare you for the role that you're in today.
I would say for me, definitely the independent studies and the senior seminars, like the seminar courses really kind of prepared me. The introductory courses provided that background, but the ability to kind of go in and do my own research and produce something that I could call my own definitely helped me for graduate school, and definitely helped me like today. A lot of what I do is just researching and writing and making it accessible. It's also worth, I will say, the ability to take different courses that of different areas of history that I might not be necessarily interested in, but now I have that background that I can kind of tie in. I would say, I guess for me, the senior seminar, I took it with Dr. Flam, and we focused on United States in the 60s. So I would say that's probably that was like prepared me really well for graduate school, and what I do today as well. I also did an independent study as well, but the senior seminar was probably the best for me.
For me, I'd say pretty similar. I think it was really important to gather those critical thinking skills. And I took my senior sem with SPAL. And I mean, it was just really amazing to be able to produce our own work, do that on our own research, which definitely helped with graduate school level work. I would say going to OU, you're at an advantage compared with many other students. You're really prepared by all of the professors and all the different courses you might take, even outside of the history department. To understand things like organization and time management and critical thinking in a variety of different topics. And there are many other schools that aren't as good as OU at teaching students that. So those were really, helpful tools that have continued on into my adult life, especially when it comes to developing accessible educational programming and exhibitions that people of all ages can relate to.
Yeah, I think Ohio Wesleyan is definitely like as a school that actually prides itself in teaching and learning. I think that the skills that I built in my major and in the program in general were pretty foundational and related to a lot of the other skills that I still use today in work. The way that I interact with all the social sciences. And Alex, you mentioned like the capstone at the end. Like if you are a history education major, you are not required to take that because there are umpteen additional courses that you have to take. But I actually always regret not having taken the capstone. Because even though Dr. Flam kicked my butt in historical inquiry, and it really, it taught me the value of hard work more than a lot of other classes, I think, especially in terms of just writing and researching. I think that those are really the opportunities that you have to professionally, intellectually grow, because it's kind of all up to you at that moment, because you are making yourself the expert in whatever you're looking into.
Absolutely. And speaking of growth, of course, I know, especially with a history degree, as with a lot of other degrees, that question of grad school comes up pretty quickly of if you need it, if you want it. So just out of curiosity, whether you chose to go back or not, could you just talk through a little bit of your thought process of why you decided to go back or why you decided you didn't need to go back for a graduate degree?
So I continued straight through my master's program. I went directly into University of Cincinnati from OWU. And I did that because what you're told as a museum professional or preparing to be one often is that you need a master's degree baseline. That has been, so you all know, something that I've learned as we've gone on in time that you don't necessarily need. You can get your foot in the door working part-time or full-time at a museum or similar institution, a historical society, natural park, national park, whatever. But for me, it was beneficial. It did help me obtain my first career because a master's degree was required to be the assistant director of that historic site. But certainly, being an OWU student and having access to the professors and the Career Center, all the different, resources at OWU can help you figure out, do you want to go directly into a graduate program? Do you want to take a gap year or two? Or maybe that's not something that's, on your journey, and that can be totally fine. You can get to where you want to go many different ways.
Yeah, I would agree with what Stephanie said. So I went straight through as well. Got my master's in history, and then that kind of helped me get my first job in a museum. But definitely those experiences of internships and volunteering will help as well. Now, if you are interested in a museum, there's a lot of different types of masters you can get, and it's sometimes I personally feel it's getting very specialized, and it kind of makes it a little bit more challenging. So I would say if you want to go into the museum field, a basic master's in history or public history are going to kind of be your set, because you can say if going to a museum doesn't work out, you can always take that history degree and that research and writing skills that you're going to get in a history or public history background and take that into another field. The specialization of the museum field, such as museum studies or museum education or collections management and care masters, those are interesting, but they kind of set you. So I would say, from what I learned going through a master's, the master's really taught me how to produce and talk to the public, and kind of present my work and defend my work, which is something you're going to be doing a lot of in a museum, no matter what department you're in. But that basic master's in history kind of really helped me figure out where I want to go, but also gave me the kind of fallback. If a museum didn't work, I could go into law or go into many other different fields that a base master's in history or public history will let you go in.
I think it's really interesting hearing about like the specialization in museums, because I know somebody who we also went to class with, Jonathan Rodriguez, ended up getting his master's in museum education. So now he works in DC doing that. So yeah, there's a lot of different fields there. I think in terms of my decision to go back to get my master's, it was a skills-based decision, because I knew it was a little bit of a transition in not a completely dissimilar direction, but in a direction that I didn't necessarily have all of the background and all of the experiences I would need to kind of plant myself in the field. So going back for education policy, it was a transition because I was 3 years out. So I would say if you know that you want to go to get your master's, you can go to get your master's, but it's not the end of the world if you want to go back like three years later. It'll be a transition, like, you know, going from like full-time work back to being a student and like, you know, whatever situation you end up making. But it is very doable. And I think that just in general, it's one of those experiences that that if you know why you're doing it, and that's the reason, like the fire behind your decision, it's something you'll get through. Also, Ohio Wesleyan compared to a lot of places, I don't know your experiences in like graduate school, but Ohio Wesleyan prepares you very well for graduate school. I knew some people that were struggling, and like based on the experiences that we were having, but like the experiences that we had in our program in history or in any other degree program, you really are prepared and completely ready to go on to graduate school.
I would also just want to add one thing on that is you in a lot of fields, you know, in order to if you're thinking about a PhD in history, a lot of places require you to have a master's first. It's you can go from directly bachelor's into PhD, but a lot of places want you to have a master's first, and then you can kind of transition into the PhD after you get your master's your first 2 years. So if you're thinking of going for a PhD, don't be discouraged if they call you back and say, hey, we actually want you to put you in our master's program rather than our PhD program, because that's just how the way the graduate world for history kind of works.
No, that's great. Thank you for that note, and thank you all for that advice. And I don't know if y'all are doing this on purpose, but you're transitioning me perfectly from question to question. So moving on to the next one, thinking about preparing for work or grad school or whatever comes next. I know you all have talked a lot about how well OWU has prepared you for those kinds of experiences, but I'd like to touch on what about OWU kind of prepared you for that. If there was something, a skill or a lesson or something that you particularly learned that has stuck with you and made all of this possible, just to share what that is and kind of how it helped you.
I guess I'll go. I would say the rigor of the academic coursework, kind of like Zach said, you know, it's, you know, I knew people in graduate school who didn't come from a liberal arts college, and they had challenges, but the kind of one-on-one, the small classes definitely help prepare me for graduate school, because you're going to have a lot of one-on-ones and small classes with your faculty, and they're going to be very focused on your work because they don't have a lot of other students. And so for me, it was the fact that you couldn't get away with anything if you were falling behind, or you weren't including enough sources, or you weren't writing to the standard that, you know, the faculty at OWU thought you were. They were going to talk to you about it. And that's kind of what graduate school is like as well, is they're going to talk to you, and they're going to make sure you don't fail, and try and support you, but, you know, they're going to support you as you go through. And that's what I found also at OWU, is that, you know, they would support you as you're going through, and kind of building you up and building up your confidence in your skills.
I think that parallels the experience that I had with the relationship building aspect with faculty and other cohort members. Because, you know, I think I had some classmates that were in just huge universities coming in, and their experience having never really had, not a full conversation with their professor, but like they never really, their professors their tenured professors never really had the time to actually have a relationship with them in the work that they did. So even if you do end up going to a larger school for your graduate degree, you are in this kind of smaller unit, and you're able to have those relationships and build, if you're in like a cohort system, or you have these smaller groups of people, you're able to kind of create those relationships. And I've made professional relationships with people that I went to graduate school with that I think I'll be able to keep, very similar to OU in that regard.
Yeah, just echoing Zach and Alex that that small group kind of setting is really beneficial going from OU to grad school. We had a cohort system at UC, and then many of our graduate assistants. So I had a graduate assistantship at UC, and that's pretty common for most master's programs and PhD programs. So I was a public history assistant, and so I worked with the director for that one, but then I also taught another semester. And I will say that going to OU and having that background of being able to kind of emulate what professors are going to do at OU in small group settings, how they structure their coursework, how they administer tests, interact with students, and have office hours and stuff. It's very beneficial. A really good example to go off of for, I would say, all of the professors in the history department, especially. They're all really talented and really knowledgeable. And then as you prepare, if you are planning to go to graduate school or go into the field, right away, I would advocate for, working with your advisor if they're in the history department, or, a professor that you feel like you have a really solid relationship with, and ask them questions, as early as you can. I think I started probably later in my junior year into, fall semester, my senior year, asking any schools they recommended, if there was anything they thought was good to look for in a history program or public history program. Like Alex mentioned, all the different master's programs and specializations there are. I talked to Dr. Flam about those as well, and so he had recommended staying broad. So just use those resources that you have at your fingertips now, because the professors at OU are awesome.
And I'd like to throw one more question at you guys that I didn't send over, just based on what you've all been saying. Networking and the importance of building that kind of community seems to be really important to all of you. So I'm just curious if you could touch on how networking has helped you and kind of the importance of it in your career.
I'll go. So I would say grad school, you're kind of forced to network. So you get a really good community of friends, because you're going through a fairly rough 2 years of graduate school. And so you get that really good connection. But, a lot of museums, they put applications out, job applications, and a lot of times they'll either hire from within, or it's about, if you know someone, if you have a connection. And so, it's very, I'm terrible at reaching out to people. I hate doing that, but you kind of force yourself to do it. And what you realize is people like talking about themselves. I mean, the three of us were here talking about ourselves, and, I don't know about you all, but like, people like talking about their experiences and how they get there. And so when you reach out to someone and say, hey, how did you get to where you went to, they're happy to tell you. And you can reach out to the lowest person on the totem pole, you can reach out to the highest person, and the odds are they'll probably talk to you. And so I would say, definitely talk to people, because those can also lead to volunteers, those can lead to being an intern, those can lead to a lot of different opportunities. And so just kind of connecting as you're going through and making that network connection is key.
Yeah, I think going off of that, I would say, never underestimate the power of asking someone for an informational interview. And you can just say, like, I'd love to have an informational interview. I'd love to learn more about your role at X, Y, or Z. Because I ended up having an interview with someone while I was in graduate school, and now she works at the US DOE. And while I haven't necessarily cultivated the relationship that much, I know that if I'm ever in a situation where I'm in the same room with her, we will recognize each other, we'll be very cordial, and we'll have some touch point to go off of in a conversation. So I think that definitely, the relationships are relationship building and building a rapport with your colleagues is pretty key in any field. So
Yeah, definitely. My light just turned off in my office, so I get it to turn back on again. All right. It's a motion sensor. So I would, echo everything that Alex and Zach said. I would also say if you're not on LinkedIn, you should join LinkedIn. That's like a really excellent tool. I know OU uses that now as the primary way to reach out to alums and stuff. So that's a really excellent tool. You can send someone a message and do what Zach just suggested and suggest like you want to schedule an informational interview. I would also suggest going to conferences. You can start going to conferences as a student. If it would make you more comfortable, go with your friends, go with a professor, like see who you can tag along with. There are many in-person and virtual ones now, especially now since the pandemic. The Ohio Museums Association is a really great resource if you're, going into the museum field. I know they just wrapped up their statewide conference, but the next one is going to be next spring in Newark, Lancaster, so not too far away from OU. And that's just a really great way to, see other museum sites and meet other museum pros. So that'd be specific to the museum field, or if you're thinking maybe that's something you want to do, that'd be a great way to make those first connections and, see if you might be able to volunteer, intern somewhere and get those lines on your resume.
Wonderful. Well, of course, to leave some time for student questions, I'm going to kind of combine the last two into one. So thinking about any advice that you would give, advice that you wish you had had when you graduated OU while you were a student, and of course, any closing thoughts that you would to leave these students with to help them on their path.
I would say to, follow whatever your passion is right now. That's something I'm definitely glad I did, because I was kind of wary of going to grad school and, figuring out what a museum career might look like. That can be kind of a challenging field to break into, but it's been really worth it for me. And try to get, as much experience in the field as you can doing whatever you might want to do. So if you want to shadow a teacher, if you want to intern at a museum, if you want to, if you want to reach out to any of the three of us, I'm sure speaking for Zach and Alex, we'd be more than willing to answer further questions after this. And, we offer summer internships here at MassMU. So, just keep reaching out and making those connections and figure out what you really love and want to do.
Yeah, I would echo that, and kind of add on that, don't discount if you're, this is just from the museum aspect, don't discount volunteer opportunities, because volunteers, that experience leads to an internship. That's experience that will get you an internship, and that's an internship is experience that will get you a job. Also, be good at doing a lot of things, wearing a lot of hats, because the history field is generally, a lot of people wear a lot of different hats. And so, have kind of build those other skills. Every once in a while, I kind of picked up how to do random little IT things because we needed someone. So, taking up these little skills that can help are important. And then I would say, like, you never know what's going to happen. For me, just, I guess, background, I applied for a part-time job at the museum that I'm at, and they offered me a full-time like the next day, right? So you never know. One, that's very rare, but like, you never know what's going to happen. So just kind of put yourself out there, because you can have opportunities just fall into your lap. And then I guess the final piece is, when you write a cover letter or a resume, make sure to like highlight what you like about that institution, and also how you can help that institution, not just, your skills, but how you want to help them. And when you get into interviews, talk about we, and kind of make yourself in your head say, like, I already have this job, but like kind of talk about like how you are going to help them rather than just like your skills, because that's what places want. I do a lot of hiring, and that's kind of, I like to see how people want to help us, rather than just a list of their skills in a cover letter.
Yeah, I think being well-rounded and kind of keeping yourself open to the new possibilities that Alex was saying. I think that at the end of the day, no matter what you end up wanting to do, your history degree is very applicable to so many different things. Like, you could go into business if you wanted. You could go into nonprofit work. You could, there's so many skills that you learn through studying history and through your degree program that if at the end of the day you want to do an about face and try something new, do it. Especially, I don't know about Alex and Stephanie, but like I'm about to turn 30, so I'm like thinking back on my 20s, and I'm just like all of the decisions that I've made, and I think that you entering your professional life, do the things that you are interested in doing and make it work, because you can make it work. No matter what you want to do.
Well, thank you all for those wonderful insights. I really appreciate all your well thought out answers and all of the details. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the screen share as well as stop the recording. And we are going to get into some student questions so that they can ask some more specific questions and kind of present things from there. So I'm going to go ahead and stop.